Thank you all for joining us today for an honest conversation about what perfectionism is costing you. I'm Nikki Irish with the DC Bar Lawyer Assistance Program. I'm the Outreach and Education Coordinator. We've been doing these programs for over a year now, and this is frankly our most highly registered one so far, with well over 200 people having registered. So decide for yourself what that means about the profession or maybe just the current state of our culture. Um, and whether perfectionism shows up for you in the workplace, in your self image, or in your parenting, or in all of the places. Um, just know that you are not alone, for starters. But also, just a reminder that it can be exhausting, right? It has a special allure, this protectionism, that it can protect us from being human, from being vulnerable, from feeling fear and pain. And like most things that promise to help you avoid the full range of human emotions, there are some costs. We are lucky to be joined today by our wonderful lab staff and our wonderful volunteer, Daphne. Daphne is going to get us started today in a couple minutes, sharing why she wanted to participate in this conversation. From there, we're going to jump right into the questions and hopefully something will resonate for you. And as a reminder, we welcome the audience participation, so please feel free to join in. Raise your hand if you want to come off mute. Submit a question in the Q&A box, which I'll make sure to read to the panelists. And if you have any thoughts you want to share, please use the chat. Denise will be monitoring that. And then just as a friendly reminder, the Lawyer Assistance Program is available to you. It's a free and confidential resource for bar members and law students. We offer short-term counseling, resources, referrals, virtual support groups, consultations if you're concerned about somebody, and then educational programs like these for your organization. So kind of without further ado, I'm going to let Daphne get us started and we'll take off from there. Thank you, Daphne.
Thanks, Nikki. Good afternoon to everyone. And I'll just start out by saying how happy I am to be here with you today and to share on this very, very important topic. I regard it as very important because the striving for perfectionism or to be perfect, however it is that you want to say that, can be so very debilitating. And I know that for myself, which is why I offered to very freely share my story with you. So, with that, let me just go right into sharing. So, I'm not someone, I'll just start here. I graduated from the great, I want to say that, the great Morgan State University in Baltimore, Maryland, a long time ago, right? I'm not going to give the actual date, but a little while ago. And I graduated with a degree in communications, right? My goal was to be on air, an on air personality. That did not work out. So I ended up going into a career with the state of Maryland where I stayed for 17 and a half years. At somewhere along that period of time, my job brought me into a lot of contact with a lot of things that I just thought personally were unfair and indecent. There were certain indecencies suffered by the employees. So I thought, how do I help? And better, how do I gain a better position to help? And with that, I thought, okay, I know, I'll go to law school, I'll help. Uh, to better position employees to deal with some of the indecencies that I felt that they were suffering. But my first thought was, you know what? You've been out of school for a while at this point, and you're just not smart enough, right? You are not, your parents weren't lawyers, you don't have that background, so forth and so on. Don't fool yourself with this legal like work, because I was an employee relations manager, with this legal like work, and think, okay, let's just jump out there and be a lawyer. So with that, it took me effectively 17 and a half years to resign my position and actually go to law school, which I did thankfully at age 43 years old. How imperfect is that? When as a non-traditional student, right? Everybody else is in their 20s. In fact, I had a friend that we called them the 20 somethings, right? Just to make ourselves feel comfortable. But going to law school, even getting into law school, it took me a multiplicity. I'm telling you, at least 5, 6, 7, 8 applications. So there were a number of different law schools that I applied to before I was actually granted admission. How imperfect is that? How debilitating, how wearying is that? But even after getting there, it was a difficult thing to get through as a 43-year-old mother of a beautiful 14-year-old at that time. Um, I didn't get to be a member of moot court. I didn't get to participate on law review. Guess what? I didn't graduate at the top 10, which is what everybody was clawing for. But I finished. And once I finished, um, I did not get a job, hold on to your seats, as a lawyer, right? I actually had to go back to my human resource background, back to employee relations. So I did that. But I think the best thing that I could have done was to join lots and to partner with the DC bar and to start to get actual exposure and experience in the legal field there, right? Giving myself an opportunity to learn from those who had legal experience and who were just great at what they did. So much and so they were also were volunteering their time or working with the bar as well. So with that being my background, if I thought on it too long, and there were times when I would take too much time to think about it. I was realizing that it was causing me to be afraid. It was causing me not to move forward, right? Because I did not feel as if my journey from step one, wherever I want to describe step one as being or pinpoint step one as being, was not perfect. It was less than, right? I didn't make straight A's in law school. I told you I wasn't on law review. I don't think they would have even taken me, but I was a great mom. And that counted for something. I think I still am. Like, we'll ask my daughter later. But there were so many things that went on, so much striving, so much stress that made the situation less than perfect for me. But I think what I had to do was overcome the need to quit, right?
Mm.
Had to overcome the need to quit. And with that, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to quit right here. And I will not bore you any further with my story, but push past it. I'm
That was a
done.
great transition. Thank you, Daphne. Right. And I really look forward to actually hearing kind of some of the application later and some advice you can give in that space. Jesse, I'm going to pivot.
Oh, you muted me.
Yep.
Do you want me to just go ahead
You
and
hear me?
Yes.
Okay. It tells me I'm muted, but the imperfect thing says host has muted you. And I'm like, but I'm the host. Um, Jesse, can we talk a little bit about kind of just so we all have a common understanding of perfectionism when we're talking about it? Because I think sometimes we may all have an idea, but we want to have kind of a clear definition for our conversation today.
Absolutely. So when you think about perfectionism, you're really thinking about these excessive and unrealistic standards of achievement. You are going to be very overly critical of yourself, hypersensitive to any form of criticism, because you're going to see it as a failure. Nothing is ever good enough, no matter how big or small the accomplishment is. So that person who is a 3L, who is number 2 or number 3 in their class, that's not good enough. So in practical times, this is going to be when you're writing that brief or that paper and you're constantly making changes because it's not good enough. You can do better. If I change this, it's going to be better. Another thing you want to think about when you're thinking about perfectionism is the strong association with self-worth. So my achievements define who I am. So if my achievements are not perfect, then I'm not perfect. It's the perception that people see me as more worthy because of what I do, not for who I am.
And then thank you, Jesse. I think that's really important. And I think kind of what you were kind of touching on that I think also shows up, right, is it's often a way to kind of gain that like acceptance, love, praise, avoid pain, kind of coping almost, right? But and Daphne, I'm just kind of wondering if you can speak a little bit to kind of the role that various factors, but like race, culture, identity, family, right? Like all go into play in perfectionism.
Mm-hmm. Sure. I think as a minority, as a whatever, however you enter into the game, I'm going to say, or the field, I think we feel immediately disadvantaged. We think we start from, like I did, age, right? 43, having when I started out, being a woman, being a mom, which I count as the greatest badge of honor. Um, just you feel disadvantaged and you feel automatically because those things are in place, what, regardless of where you may find yourself in the minority spectrum, you feel as if there's a need to overcompensate, to be absolute better than the best. So you start off from a place of perfectionism automatically, or striving for perfectionism, right? Even more than the average individual, right? Who made all A's, who isn't a mom, who started law school at 20 something, on and on and on, right? These are the things that disadvantage us, but, or where we feel. And I think those things push us further or deeper into the need to seem perfect or to be perfect. But I think one of the things that I would like for us to take home or to understand, they're not real, right? Those little voices that you hear in your head, they're only your voices, right? Nobody else is actually pushing you as hard as you are pushing you, right? I didn't have my daughter saying, Mom, you got to be a lawyer. I didn't. She really didn't. As long as things were running at home, she was fine. So the drive was my own. And so that perfectionism drive, we can turn off regardless as to where we may find ourselves. Black, white, whatever the identity or the cultural thing may be. So I hope I answered that in
Yeah,
least to
and
some extent.
I think that's really helpful. One of the things I wonder though a little bit is, so I think it's our voice, right? Like it is our voice. But I wonder sometimes, just here, Sharon, if you can speak to what you notice with clients, and that like it's an internalized external voice, right? Like there's messaging we get from so many places that become our own voice. Is there anything you would talk about that related to perfectionism?
I mean, I think related to what Daphne is saying, to keep on that trend, the white supremacy culture, right, like uses perfectionism to keep everybody in power, right? So, I mean, I don't necessarily think that's coming directly from our clinical sessions, but that is like if you step back and look at the bigger picture, that's the system. And if you continue to go based upon the system, you're going to lose steam and lose energy because it's exhausting.
So tying into that, like, so some of that is a cost. So there is a cost to perfectionism, is what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that with conformity carries the power to make us ignore who we are, ignore our authentic selves. And it kind of creates a division between who we are and what we're presenting to the world, right? Like it's not always bad to stay in our comfort zone with our beliefs, with our people. But if we conform to what others expect of us, we might lose our individuality in order to quote unquote feel accepted or fit that perfect image.
And Daphne, is there anything for you in terms of like how that ended up showing, like actual ways it showed up for you professionally or personally, the perfectionism?
Actually, the striving for perfectionism, when I missed it, right? When I missed the mark, whatever it may have been, grades, the job as a lawyer, so forth, having to go back to HR, it made me feel, for the lack of a better way of putting it, just plain old lazy, right? Because you get to the point where you're trying and trying, you've sent out enough applications, you've made enough interest inquiries, all of that other stuff, and it's not working. So you're constantly missing in your mind. What your mind is telling you is that you're constantly missing the mark. So for a period, I would actually just stop trying, right? And become the consummate couch potato, right? And not do the self-talk, right? Use the wrong self-talk in too many instances. So that was the cost. My own self-esteem at a point. Yeah, so that's generally how I would answer that question.
Jesse, is there anything you wanted to that you've kind of noticed or wanted to add?
Absolutely. So I say, you know, when with the clients I've worked with, one of the things I've definitely noticed when they talk about how it shows up is kind of what Daphne's saying, is this constant fear that I'm not going to be successful. So it turns into procrastination and that I can't overcome it. I can't start this because in the back of the mind, if I don't start this, then I can't fail at it. But then it gets to the point where you're in the wire and then you're just pushing yourself to get this assignment done, you know, whether it's a paper or whether it's a brief you're trying to write. Another way is inability to accept compliments or celebration. So when you do get that high achievement or praise, for whether it is from a teacher or from your boss, you're quick to dismiss it. You're just going to be that one to say, oh, you know what, I just got lucky, or someone helped me with that. And then lastly, the constant need for validation, because again, there's always going to be that one accomplishment is never enough. What's going to be my next one to show my worth that I am this perfect person?
And then I'm pivoting slightly just because I want to make sure to note in the chat, just essentially somebody made the point, which I think is an important one, that it can be a pervasiveness across many cultures. Perfectionism. There can be conversation on like the root of where that comes from. And I wonder if maybe some of that's what Sharon was talking about, but I think we see it is seen everywhere across kind of all cultures, all religions, all families, like it shows up. So just wanting to kind of validate that space, whether that comes from your family of origin, whether that comes from your culture, whether that comes from like the school structure, kind of wherever that is. But so I'm just kind of pivoting a little bit to validate that, and then I'm going to circle back. We've been talking about kind of so how it shows up, what are the costs. I'm going to leave it there for in terms of just a moment in case we missed some costs, kind of what cost of perfectionism, like why should I not be aiming for perfectionism, I guess is the question. If everybody's telling me I should, my culture is telling me I should, school is telling me I'm supposed to get a 4.0, I'm graded on curves, so clearly I need to be trying to be better than the other people. In the law, it's like you can't fail a case, you can't get it wrong. So everybody's telling me I'm supposed to be perfect. Why should I not be aiming for that?
I think one of the things is thinking about our mental health. And by our mental health, I'm also talking about our physical health, right? So right now, right, like when you're doing a presentation, probably your cortisol is rising, right, to keep you attentive and energized and all of that, which is great, that quick burst of energy. But with perfectionism, there's high levels of stress over time. The body can't recover properly, right? And this can lead to long-term physical issues. It could be thyroid dysfunction. It could be high blood pressure. It could be bone density, right? It's things that I feel like we've heard of throughout time, but more so I feel like since 2020, right? Like since there's been this constant stress. I think that's something to sort of think about when you ask the question of like, what is the cost, right? I almost think it's like, to what end, right? Like, what are you willing to sacrifice? And there's many things that we are sacrificing, right? Like relationships, high levels of anxiety. There's many things, but I think to think about that physical component is a little bit more palatable for some people.
And if I may, I would just add to that point, one of the things that we need to know, and I think in pursuit of perfectionism, is that it's never attainable, because the first standard that you set and say, well, that's perfect. Once it's attained, seemingly, then it becomes outdated. It's almost like cell phones. My God, once you learn how to use it, then it's time to upgrade. So it's never, it's just so, it's an illusion, right? So you're wasting time spinning wheels seeking after perfection, or even comparing yourselves or to others, right? I used to always say, you know, we may be in the same place, right? My colleagues and I, but we aren't running the same race, right? So it's me against me. It's not me against you, right? I think when we put up those standards and situations like that, then, you know, that's where I want to be better than you. I want to be what's called perfect or whatever. But, you know, I think because it's so essentially unattainable, I think, you know, the cost is a waste of time.
Yeah, there's not a return on investment. I think that's what I just heard you say, essentially, right? Because it does impact our mental health, right? Like anxiety, depression, addiction, eating disorders, all of those things often are closely or can be impacted by perfectionism, as well as productivity, right? Like at the end of the day, our productivity often decreases um, with perfectionism because it gets in the way. It forces us to procrastinate. It forces us to spend 5 hours on something that probably should have only taken an hour, right? There's so many different it's fatiguing. There's so many different kind of costs with that. So we kind of know the cost to a degree, whether we always articulate them or not. I think most people feel them. What I guess I wonder is how do we start moving the space from perfection, which is unattainable, right? You said essentially, versus like striving for excellence, right? Like, so Jesse, like, what is it that key difference? And like, how do I start to know when I cross the line?
Well, I think first of all, recognizing there is a key difference. Perfectionism is not the same as striving for excellence. Okay. Because people who are perfectionistic is all or none thinkers. So if I don't achieve this certain thing, everything else underneath it is somehow irrelevant or discounted. Versus someone who strives for excellence will say, even if I didn't reach this goal, I needed and met. So if my goal was 100%, but I made 90, I'm still going to celebrate that. So I'm not going to discount that achievement. One of the analogies I often tell my clients is kind of like someone who's a perfectionist is always moving the goalposts on themselves without celebrating the goal. So I graduated law school, but I'm not going to celebrate because I need to make sure I get past the bar the first time. And then once I do that, I'm not celebrating that because I need to make sure once I get into this law firm, then I make partner X amount a year. Then I make the partner, but then I got this. So it's this constant striving, but there's no acceptance or even celebration of what they have achieved. And another thing is, when you kind of think about it, it's fear-based most of the time. Because again, this person is such a high achiever. If I don't achieve these goals, how do I see myself?
What do you do with that fear?
The first one is acknowledge it. I think that's the first thing. We got to acknowledge that we're not always going to be perfect because it's so subjective what perfection means. If I'm perfect in this, does that mean I'm not going to be perfect in other areas of my life? Is that even an attainable goal?
So what can I aim for, right? Like I can't aim for perfect because I know I can't achieve that. But like what can I aim for? Because perfection often gives me a feeling of safety. It gives me a feeling of protection. It tells me that I'm like on the right path, or maybe I think the perfectionism I've aimed for has like gotten me to where I am in my career. So how do I start to shift to like aiming slightly lower? Like what does that look like?
I think one of the questions you got to ask yourself, instead of saying, what are this person going to think of me? Am I doing, no, actually, let me rephrase it. Question you want to ask yourself is, how can I continue to strive to improve? So I've gotten this much knowledge and I'm excelling in this way. What's my next way for me to continue to improve? It's celebrating my achievement, but I'm still saying, this is the next level I want to go to.
A comment I really liked actually, so Darren wrote, some people aim unreasonably high with no hope or expectation of attaining a specific goal, but where they land is still in a really good spot and they're okay with that, right? Like that distinction of expectation, like the expectation is different. Or at least that was would be my interpretation. Daphne, have you experienced that? Like how did you get to a place where you might be able to do that?
I think
Like
the point in the
expectations.
in that last comment, I think the point about you're shooting for a specific goal, you may miss it, but you land in a good spot. I think it ties right in very well with what Jesse was saying. Learn how to celebrate,
Yeah.
right? The win and recognize that it is a win, right? I may not have gotten, for example, we said 100%, but I did make 90. And so that's
Mm-hmm.
worthy of celebration. I think that helps us to shift the paradigm just a little bit. And it teaches us, or it trains us to
Mm-hmm.
continue to operate, right? In that vein, right? It's like, okay, sometimes we just have to relearn certain behaviors. And if perfection and being what we determine is perfect, we need to shift it. If that's the goal, let's shift it and let's learn how to celebrate 90%, with an understanding that nothing is perfect, and it most certainly isn't always perfect, right? Because it's me trying. It's not some robotic prototype of me. It's me trying. It's me working at this. And some days I'm having it, and some days I don't. So let's learn to celebrate the 90%. Let's learn not to say that we shouldn't strive for whatever else is better, 91%. But let's learn to celebrate that. I think that's how you shift it. I really
What
do. Making an
what does that look
intentional,
like for you? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
What I was gonna ask is just kind of what does that look like for you, right? Like so I was aiming for 100, I got to 90, right? What does celebrating look like? What is still acknowledging that I'd like to get to 91 look like,
Mhm.
but I'm still going to celebrate my 90? Like, can you talk a little bit about that kind of what that looks
Absolutely. So 100% in a real life, real talk example, 100% is a legal position, right?
like?
It's a legal position. 90% is a position in a field that I worked in for 17 and a half years, and I'm able to yet support my family. But the striving and the improvement is still yet applying, right?
Mm-hmm.
And even getting the interview, even though I may not have gotten a job, is still worthy of let's go out to dinner, right? Because I'm
Yeah.
one step closer
Yeah.
than I was on
Yeah.
yesterday. So that's real life, right? The you
Mm-hmm.
know the for me,
Yeah.
and I'll leave it right there.
That's a great example. Thank you so much.
I was just
Sharon?
going to quickly add in, just sort of before the celebration. I think a lot of times what we see with clients, I'm thinking in particular of the law students and the younger attorneys. There's so much undoing and unlearning that happens within our offices. Because the structure, right, and people sort of are saying this in the chat a little bit, of law school, of the system, right, is to sort of, you do this, you do this, you do this. And like Jesse said, like we're moving the goalposts. And so I think a lot of our work is doing the unlearning, and then hopefully we get to the celebration, right? It takes a little bit.
What does unlearning look like? Like for somebody who has, let's say, like I haven't gone to therapy, I haven't talked to somebody about unlearning. Like, what does that mean? Like, what is unlearning?
I think it's having a real honest conversation about our core beliefs, right? And what we have learned, like where do we get the messaging from? Because I think that once you've made it into the therapy room or whatnot, hopefully for many, they're ready to listen. Not everybody, right? But they know that they want to change and they want to learn and they want to grow, but they're not sure how, because I K through, law school, through the bar exam, I had to go, 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 go. And now we're saying, like, take a breath,
Mm-hmm.
right? And for some people, they don't want to take a breath, and then they're probably not going to come see us. But for those that are, right, we work with them to figure out who they are, because they've lost themselves in law school, right? And like you were saying, if they get the 91 and not the 95 or not the 100, like, how does that feel now? How do we work through it now that you are, have all these documents that you have to get in by 5 p.m. on a Tuesday, but maybe you're only going to get it in on Wednesday. Like, how does that feel like for you? And working with the discomfort, essentially, which is what it always comes back to.
There are two, go ahead, Jesse.
No, it just kind of reminded me. One thing also is being able to, especially when, as Sharon was saying, is those younger attorneys, or even maybe those attorneys who just reach a point in their career they always wanted to be able to sit back and reflect like, wow, I did all of this and I'm finally where I want to be. So maybe just being able to have that opportunity to reflect on the journey, because that may make you appreciate the goal that you've achieved even more.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a great example. I was listening to a podcast about perfectionism before this a little while ago. One of the things they talked about is the propensity to compare out versus compare in, right? So an ability to say like, this is how I've improved, like over the course of time, right? Like my writing has improved if I look at it today versus if I looked at it 6 months ago. And that is somebody who is not like struggling with their perfectionism versus I'm looking at my writing compared to the attorney who's 6 years my senior saying, why is my writing not as good as theirs? And like that comparison is really important, can be an important aspect around perfectionism, about like having kind of realistic things to compare ourselves to, and working to recognize our own accomplishments versus kind of comparing out to others. That for some reason, Jesse, what you said just sparked that for me. There are two kind of questions that I think or related to also what's in the chat. And it is all about culture, right, in the legal profession. So one of the questions, I'm going to throw it out there, whoever wants to respond, feel free. But how to essentially deal with our supervisors and clients who are saying they expect perfectionism kind of based on billing rates and competition and those aspects of the profession. So how would you suggest somebody navigate that?
So I will say this. I'm going to admit, there are going to be some employers and even some clients where it is going to be a challenge. And one of the ways is going to be, even though they using the term perfectionism, it's really being able to understand what the expectation is of this assignment and being able to frame it to, being able to frame it to the client or even to your employer. Okay, I can be able to achieve this and this, and having that conversation. And I'm going to say it's going to be hard. Some employers are going to be easier than others, where you're going to be able to push back and being able to set realistic expectations. And then there are going to be clients or even supervisors where it's going to be a challenge.
And I would just add to that, because I saw in the chat where someone effectively said, how do you handle or how do you best navigate situations where the employee, the client, colleagues, whomever, weaponizes, right, the lack of perfectionism, right? I think in a situation like that, you must be prepared to give yourself room to learn, right? To learn, to experience, to be exposed. Because I think the one thing we do as attorneys is we go into a situation, we go into a circumstance, and the veneer, we would like for the veneer to present as if we know everything, we got it all together. There are no questions that I can't answer, right? Notice how when, Nikki, you asked that one question, there was a pause, right? Mm-hmm. Everyone on the panel, let me think about that. I don't have an immediate question. Listen, let's learn how to step back. We've already done it. We've proven, right, that we got it together enough to get through 3 years of law school, to sit for the bar and pass it, to get this job and support and do whatever and move on. Now let's give ourselves an opportunity. So to step back and learn and experience and be exposed to new things, because inevitably there are situations that we've not had an opportunity to experience or be exposed to. So turn it. When it comes, oh, you didn't make the grade, you didn't get the whatever. Right, I didn't. Now, would you mind showing me how? Or is there a way by which I could learn how? I don't know. I think the fear of not being perceived as less than is more of the weapon than the whole imperfection thing.
I think that ties into something that came up a lot, or came up a couple times in preparation for this, is particularly kind of younger, newer attorneys, right? Like this struggle of kind of expectation of the perfectionism. Like, how do I kind of start to accept that nothing I'm going to do early on nothing will ever be perfect, but particularly early on, nothing I'm going to do is going to be perfect. So like, how do I navigate that? What are what are some actual kind of tools or mechanisms or approaches can I do with that besides time? Because time is a big one. But that's something we can't control. It's just time. See, it's not easy. Everybody's thinking.
See how imperfect we all are. Nobody knows the right answer. Let's the right answer. It's so situational. I'm going to use the M word. What about mentoring, right?
Mm-hmm.
Attaching yourself to someone you trust who won't weaponize your imperfections, your shortcomings, or shortfalls. Attach yourself to a mentor. Again, give yourself space to know and understand that I don't have all the answers, but there may be someone who may not also have all the answers, but they have more than I did, right? So maybe that's an option, right? And thank God I've made it to 50. So even at 50, I have a mentor, right? In this whole legal field because it's necessary, right? I've only been barred since 2021, right? In the height of a pandemic, no less. So yeah, I need a mentor. So yeah, let's step back and learn. Maybe attach yourself to someone else.
I love that. That's exactly what I was going to say, Daphne. And I think that to go even further, right? Like to your point, we need community, right? And I feel like you might not find it at your job. You might not find it with the attorneys that you know, right? I'm not promoting our support groups right now, but just saying there are spaces, right, where you can find like-minded individuals where you get that support. Hopefully you do get it at your job, but if you don't, right, or if you're having issues with your supervisor or whatnot, just to connect with other people and for them to be able to say, I've been there, right? Here's how I tackled that. It's one thing to get that feedback from your spouse or your friend or your therapist, but it's so much more validating, I find, to hear it from one another.
I think both of those are mentoring and the community space are really incredibly important because we need kind of somebody to check ourselves, right? We're not necessarily our best judge. And I guess I would tie that into this word that I think is incredibly important and maybe some people cringe at, but like the self-compassion space, right? So I guess I wonder kind of the interplay between self-compassion and perfectionism, and if you could talk about that a little bit. Jesse, I'm going to pivot it to you.
I think it's important to kind of give ourselves that self-compassion that, again, when we say we shouldn't be striving for excellence, that's not mean we're not saying that you shouldn't strive. I mean, so when we say you shouldn't strive for perfectionism, that does not mean you should strive for excellence. But having that compassion for yourself, saying that I may not achieve what I want to, but can I learn through the process and grow through that process? Because I think it gives yourself a little bit of self-compassion. You're still holding yourself to a certain standard that you want to achieve, but punishing yourself because you didn't hit it exactly the way you wanted to hit it, to kind of, again, diminish the work that you've done, and it doesn't give you the opportunity to really learn from that situation.
I think that's so important in connecting a piece. I think too is like that common humanity piece that comes in self-compassion, right? It's a core part. Is it like everybody struggles? Like you're not right. I think oftentimes we think we're the only ones struggling to not do well or be good enough, whereas in fact we had over 200 people register for this program. Clearly, there are a lot of people struggling with those same feelings. So those feelings of, I guess, inadequacy. So I guess that common humanity space, kind of one tool that I think it's a simplified way of thinking about self-compassion, but essentially, am I talking to myself the way I would talk to my best friend or the person I care about, right? So if Jessie and I are having a conversation and Jessie's presented me with a problem that she's noticing, like, I didn't feel I did a good enough job today on the perfectionism panel. Am I going to be like, yeah, you didn't. It was really bad. You forgot 5 of the things that we were supposed to talk about. How could you do that? Like, wow, I'm not going to invite you to any more panels. Like, probably wouldn't have that conversation with Jesse, right? I would be much more caring and kind and be like, I think you did a pretty good job. I think there were a couple pieces maybe we forgot about, but we all forget those things from time to time. And maybe next time we can figure out a way to like get them in, right? Those are two very distinct ways of talking to ourselves. And I think it's important to think about and kind of start to be mindful of if we're talking to ourselves in a way that I would talk to somebody I actually care about. Would I say those words out loud to somebody else, right? And for the people who are on screen, you all laughed when I kind of said the way I would talk to Jesse if I was like talking to myself, because that most people with some level of emotional intelligence wouldn't do that. I recognize there's some people with limited emotional intelligence, they might do that, but most people wouldn't. So that part of self-compassion, I think, ties in very closely with perfectionism, and it is a skill set that we can develop and grow over time, and it's a practice. And I'm curious what other practices maybe or other ways I could start to shift out of this perfectionism tendency and stay behind the line of like striving for excellence, but not like crossing it. Like, what are some other ways that we could approach that?
What I have found really helpful with clients, because attorneys are really up here, right? Even though we're trying to connect, is reframing things, right? Because the language comes before the feeling in that way. I think that's kind of it, right? Like being able to take that inner critic and those negative thoughts and speak to it like you're talking to a colleague that you really admire, like you're talking to your partner. And one day soon, right, as you start to practice that, hopefully it will hit when you're having that negative thought for yourself and you're able to reframe it.
Jesse, is there anything else around kind of that reframing or rethinking space that we could do?
I think it's challenging those thoughts of what you see as perfection, because there are some core beliefs that we believe that in a way kind of feed our thoughts about perfectionism. So I often tell people is, what are those thoughts that you feel like, why you feel like you need to be perfect? What are those things how does perfectionism relate to who you are? So I say challenging those thoughts. So when you say, we were actually talking about, as we're preparing for this, one of the things we're saying is, I can't invite someone over to my home because it's a mess. It has to be clean. Every room has to be perfect. Again, it may seem trivial, but are people coming to see your home or are they coming to see you? Mm-hmm. So again, it's just redefining what perfectionism means. You have to submit that journal article. And you're waiting to the hour because you have to change every little thing. How much are those 5-6 changes that you want to make? How is it going to change your overall topic that you're trying to address? Is it really fundamentally going to change? And if it doesn't, then is it excellence you're striving for or perfectionism?
That's great. Thank you. Daphne, I'm going to open it up to you just to see if there are kind of any other things you've noticed for yourself that work.
For me, I think one of the things with the self-care, the point that we made about the self-care has been tremendous for me. Understanding what the self-care is and how it looks, what I should do when. Sometimes when I've missed the mark, right? When I've been out there trying to do it and have come up short, right? Now it's time for some self-care and no derogatory self-talk. Right. And I've learned how to use different celebrations, right? Sometimes it's as sweet as taking a walk on a day when it's abnormally warm, right? Or taking a walk on a day when it's rainy, believe it or not. I don't know what that is for me, but that feels good. Having the rain fall on your face, that feels good. So the celebration isn't always going out to eat because that could cause other problems in other areas. And then you're depressed about that because now I look really less than perfect according to my own standard. Mm-hmm. And so identifying the celebration also helps me, right? What's good in this moment? Sometimes the celebration is just a step back, right? Just roll back on the chair and, roll back from the desk and I don't know, just close my eyes for a moment. So that understanding what the celebration is helping me to what's good in a moment helps me to kind of shift it as well.
And I like that you used kind of celebration on a continuum, right? Like it can be something very small, um, in a brief moment, or it can be kind of larger. And I think that's an important, mm, just important to note. I also wonder, like curiosity, like where does curiosity come in with perfectionism, and is it something that can be helpful?
Oh, absolutely. Because again, it goes
Mhm.
back to I can be curious about why am I pushing myself this further? What am I really trying to, what does getting this accomplishment, what is that going to give me? So being curious about what's driving this can sometimes have us own be able to reflect like, okay, this is really unhealthy for me. This is what it's costing me. This is how it's impacting me.
So kind of exploring it more and kind of challenging it more too, a little bit, it sounds like, which I think lawyers can be good at. Sharon, you came off.
I think it's important to take the time to actually do that though, right? If we're constantly going and striving for that, I'm striving not the right word, but achieving that next goalpost, we might not want to stop to think about how we're feeling and getting curious. You have to get quiet to get curious, right? And so I think that if you have signed up for this program, you're kind of already halfway there because you are thinking about it. It's taking it to that next step. And when you are driving home from work or when you have some 5 minutes of quiet time, engage within your own thoughts and don't avoid by doing other things, which is so much easier said than done.
And we will send out, there's a great worksheet link that we're going to send out, for anybody that wants to do a little more quiet exploration. If you've registered, well, clearly you all registered. Once you register, I'm going to send out the resources to you. Um, Recognizing we have about 10 minutes left, there is something that I kind of kept seeing or continue to see, and it came up another question. But essentially, right, all of this is kind of within the legal profession, this culture of perfection. But somebody brought up, which I think there's an interesting tie-in. It says, kind of, how do you deal with a culture of kind of in the workplace, teams or supervisors working up until like this deadline for perfection, versus kind of like planning ahead, effectively meeting the deadline, not having that like drama and stress of it, and um, culture of like effectiveness versus kind of this culture of like intensity and perfection. Um, I'm not problem solving that today. I'm acknowledging it and just seeing if anybody else has some space that they wanted to comment on that. I think there's often underlying fear with that, but that's just my quick kind of 2 cents that I'd love to hear what you all think.
Well, one thing I would wonder is in those circumstances when those assignments, like again, I'm sure there's some assignments that come down to a wire, but for those are you able to, you feel like you're in a safe space where you can inquire and be curious at the beginning? Like, what's the expectation of this client from the start? What are the deadlines? Start asking those questions in the beginning. So maybe there's not that rush to the end.
I think it also comes back to boundaries, which is a completely other conversation that we're going to continue to have, right? But it's about setting those expectations, like Jesse's saying, but also knowing within reason, because I know that it is a profession that just keeps going, to set that boundary for yourself where, if you're expected to do way too much, right, by 5 p.m. and you literally can't get it done, to say, thank you so much, I'll get this to you by close of business tomorrow, if that is possible, right? But just small steps, so that you are able to have some breathing room.
And I just really liked in the comments, the observation that perfectionism often comes from kind of feelings of inadequacy, and inferiority, and getting curious about those can be really important. And then bolstering our sense of self, right? Like sense of self outside of, let's say, if work is where you really see a lot of perfectionism coming in, are there places outside of work that I can bolster my sense of self? So I'm not fully reliant only on one sense of identity. I wonder if actually, I'm gonna go with this question. Sorry, I'm pivoting in my head completely. If an attendee can only remember one thing from today, what do you hope that is?
I would throw out there that I would want all of us to remember that we are imperfectly perfect or perfectly imperfect. And I think that actually makes us individuals, right? And I think that's a good thing, right? I think that if we can just remember that we are perfectly imperfect, I think that's going to help us, right? Those my little nuances, the little crazy things, the way I twitch sometimes, whatever it is that I do, right, that makes me different. It's my difference, and that's what I bring to the table. And there's nothing wrong with that. That really is all good.
Can I ask you one quick question while Jesse and Sharon think of their answer?
Mm-hmm.
Did that take you time to get to? Right? Like, I think a lot of times people show up to this space. Well, in general, we all show up to wherever we are and say, oh, okay, I've identified I'm a perfectionist and I would really like to change today. And I'm going to wake up tomorrow and I would like it to be different. Right. So, which is not realistic, right? Like, that's not humans work. So I want, can you validate for us that like it's taken you some time to get to that space?
Absolutely, it is. And you know what? The time that it took me to realize it, I was going through trial and error because you show up, you want this polished presentation, and you make all of this effort to be sure that this presentation is polished, polished, polished. And by presentation, I mean me. Only to show up thinking that every I is dotted and every T is crossed calls me.
Mm-hmm.
And to see, doggone, I got a scuff on my shoe. There's always something. And so that day, I learned, okay, guess what? It's a perfect imperfection. It's not a daggone it, you should have checked or anything like that. It really is. And having those events in my life, time after time after time, it's like, well, you know what? I walk fast, so I'm gonna suck my shoe. It's just the way of it. And you're like, okay, that's just it for me. That's just my thing, right? And it's cool,
Yeah.
right? It really is. I'm telling myself, you might not think it's cool, but doggone it, I do. And what matters? What I think.
Yep.
So that's just the way it goes.
Thank you, Jeff. Go ahead, Sharon or Jesse.
I would say is one thing, I think it was Benita, but I'm not sure it was one of the members saying, strive for excellence, not perfectionism. I think we need to understand that in the journey to grow as a legal professional, there's going to be a lot of bumps. There's going to be a lot of learning opportunities, and cannot see that as ability to become excellent versus striving to be perfect. And I think get comfortable celebrating your achievements, not discounting them, not saying you got lucky, not saying that, I had help from my coworker, being able to celebrate those small achievements, even if it's not every single day. Get comfortable celebrating your achievements.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I think too, we have to recognize that like our neural pathways have been created since we were little, right? And it's hard to change our way of thinking, and we have to really just be intentional with how we're going about things, and taking those incremental steps, right? So that we can change our way of thinking, so that we can strive for excellence, right? And just to be kind to yourself. This is a process and it takes time. Like Daphne said, it doesn't happen overnight.
So we're leaving you with time. Give it some time, but also that we acknowledge there are a lot of kind of the toxic water that we swim in. Essentially, we want to acknowledge that, and we want to acknowledge that right now this is what we can control. The Lawyer Assistance Program is available to you if you want some help with it. There are a lot of other resources. We will send out some of those resources after this program, but we're happy to kind of continue this conversation. We appreciate you having the conversation with us. We know it is a space where we all have kind of some room. I was thinking about this like in the small ways as a recovering kind of perfectionist, right? Like I remember as a kid, like every sport I played that I was not naturally good at, like I quit, right? Like I was like, if I'm not going to be perfect at it, I'm not going to play it. And how sad that is, like as an adult, like getting to enjoy playing softball. I'm like very mediocre at it, right? But in my 20s, I had a great time playing softball, but like I missed out on these years because that feeling of like inadequacy was something I could not handle. And I think that carries through on many different areas of our life. So just kind of the pervasiveness of it is important to kind of acknowledge. And with time, we can work on that. And we hope you do continue to work on it. And we are available if you have other suggestions or thoughts on what we could do for honest conversations. We welcome those. We plan to kind of continue these. And so thank you everybody for showing up. And we're around if any, I'll stop the recording, but we're around if anybody has any additional kind of questions or comments they want to make.